Tommy, a 5-year-old boy, lay quietly in his hospital bed, staring out the window at the world he could no longer be a part of. The vibrant colors of the playground across the street seemed like a distant memory, something he would never be able to enjoy again. For months, Tommy had been battling a rare and aggressive form of cancer, enduring countless rounds of treatment and surgeries. Every day felt like a struggle, and the hospital room had become his world. His parents, Sarah and Mark, did everything they could to keep his spirits up, but nothing seemed to work. Tommy had stopped smiling, stopped laughing, and his bright eyes had lost the sparkle they once had. Every visit from friends and family only reminded him of the life he could no longer live. Then, one morning, something incredible happened. Keanu Reeves, the beloved actor known for his roles in movies like The Matrix and John Wick, walked into Tommy's hospital room. The soft sound of the door opening was the first sign that something unusual was happening. Tommy's mother, Sarah, who had been sitting beside his bed, looked up in disbelief. There, standing in the doorway, was none other than Keanu Reeves himself, a big smile on his face and a giant bag of balloons in his hand. "Hey there, buddy," Keanu said warmly, his voice calm and reassuring. "I heard you might need a little cheering up today." Tommy's eyes widened in astonishment. He couldn't believe it. His favorite actor was standing right in front of him. The room seemed to brighten instantly, as if Keanu's presence had filled it with a warmth Tommy hadn't felt in months. Keanu gently set the bag of balloons down beside Tommy's bed, pulling out a colorful bunch of them. "I brought you some balloons," Keanu said, holding them up for Tommy to see. "And some candy, too." For the first time in what felt like forever, Tommy's lips curled into a smile. His favorite actor, the man he had seen on the big screen countless times, was right here with him, bringing him a gift. But as Sarah watched, she could sense there was something more to this visit than just a simple celebrity gesture. Little did they all know, this meeting would change Tommy's life in ways they could never imagine. But before we continue, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss the twists and turns this story's about to take. Tommy was like any other young boy, full of energy and curiosity before the diagnosis. He loved playing outside, chasing after butterflies in the backyard and racing around the neighborhood on his little scooter. His laughter was the soundtrack of the house, and his boundless enthusiasm kept his parents, Sarah and Mark, on their toes. He had a way of making everything feel like an adventure, from simple trips to the grocery store to family outings to the park. But that all changed one cold winter afternoon. It started with a persistent cough that wouldn't go away. Sarah assumed it was just a cold, something Tommy had picked up from the other kids at preschool. But as days turned into weeks, Tommy's health began to deteriorate. He was tired all the time, had trouble breathing, and seemed to have lost all his energy. Concerned, Sarah and Mark took him to the doctor, where a series of tests revealed the shocking news. Tommy had a rare form of cancer. It was an aggressive type of leukemia that had no clear cause, no way to predict how it would progress. The doctors did their best to stay optimistic, but the truth was hard to bear. The treatments were grueling, the hospital visits endless, and Tommy's once vibrant personality seemed to fade away with every round of chemotherapy. His little body was too fragile to fight back the way it used to. But through it all, Tommy never stopped holding on to hope. He always asked his parents when he could go back to playing with his friends, when he could get back to his scooter rides and bike races. His parents did their best to protect him from the worst of the news, always reassuring him that they would fight together, that they would get through this as a family. But they couldn't escape the reality of the situation. The chance of Tommy's recovery was slim, and they had no idea what the future held. Sarah often sat by Tommy's bed at night, holding his tiny hand in hers, praying for a miracle. Mark, usually the strong and silent one, had become more withdrawn. He spent his days researching experimental treatments, hoping against hope that something could save his son. But despite their best efforts, they both felt a growing sense of helplessness, as if they were powerless in the face of something so much bigger than they were. Then came that phone call, the one that changed everything. It was an outreach program for sick children, a charity that worked to bring joy and hope to young patients. The coordinator on the other end of the line explained that they had a very special guest who wanted to meet Tommy. At first, Sarah thought it might be a local celebrity or a well-known figure from the community. But when she heard the name Keanu Reeves, her heart skipped a beat. Keanu Reeves, the actor who had given so much to charities, the one known for his generosity and down-to-earth nature. He wanted to visit Tommy. It sounded too good to be true, but Sarah knew this was an opportunity they couldn't pass up. Maybe, just maybe, this visit could be the spark that would bring Tommy back to life. And that's how, on an ordinary Wednesday morning, Tommy found himself face to face with the man he had always admired from afar. The joy and wonder in Tommy's eyes were evident as he looked up at Keanu. This was more than just a visit. It was a chance for Tommy to feel seen, to feel special, even if only for a little while. As Keanu handed him the balloons and candy, Tommy could hardly contain his excitement. But what Tommy didn't know was that this visit, this simple act of kindness, would lead to something even greater than anyone could have imagined. The moment Keanu Reeves stepped into Tommy's hospital room, everything changed. For a brief moment, it was as if the walls of the sterile white room dissolved, and the outside world, full of laughter, joy, and hope, rushed in. Tommy's face lit up with disbelief and excitement as he stared up at Keanu, his hero. For the first time in weeks, he forgot about the pain, the constant needles, and the isolation he'd been living with. "Wow, it's really you," Tommy exclaimed, his voice full of wonder. Keanu smiled warmly, sitting down beside Tommy's bed. "Yeah, it's me. I heard you've been having a rough time, and I thought I'd drop by and bring you something fun." He handed Tommy the bag of balloons, and Tommy's small hands eagerly grabbed the colorful balloons, his eyes sparkling with joy. "These are for you," Keanu said, his gentle tone never wavering. Tommy was in awe. He couldn't believe it. The man he had watched on screen so many times was right here in his room, sitting next to him. It was a dream come true for the little boy who had spent so much of his time confined to a hospital bed. But as the minutes ticked by, the reality of the situation slowly began to settle in for Sarah and Mark. They had been hoping that Tommy's spirits would lift with the visit, and they could see the excitement in his eyes. But in the back of their minds, they couldn't escape the grim truth. Tommy's condition wasn't improving. Despite the joy this surprise brought, it didn't change the fact that their son was still sick. Mark leaned against the wall, his arms crossed tightly over his chest, struggling to keep his emotions in check. He wanted to feel the hope that this visit was bringing, but something deep inside him kept whispering that it was just a fleeting moment of happiness, one that wouldn't last. Sarah, sitting on the other side of Tommy's bed, smiled at her. Sunbut couldn't help the knot that tightened in her stomach. She'd been through so many ups and downs in the past few months. From the brief hope of Tommy's remission to the crushing news that his cancer had spread, it had felt like a roller coaster of emotions. She just wanted to see her little boy happy again, to see that spark in his eyes that had been missing for so long. Keanu, sensing the tension in the room, glanced over at Sarah and Mark. He had a soft spot for children, especially those who were facing challenges he couldn't even begin to comprehend. He could tell that Tommy's parents were holding it together, but the weight of the situation was evident. Keanu knew he wasn't just there to bring joy to Tommy, he was also there to offer them something they desperately needed: hope. After a few more moments of laughter and chatter, Keanu stood up to leave, but before he did, he paused and turned to Tommy. "Hey buddy, I've got something for you," he said, reaching into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a small envelope and handed it to Tommy. "This is for you to open when you're ready, okay?" Tommy nodded eagerly, holding the envelope as if it were the most precious thing in the world. "Thank you, Mr. Reeves. I'll open it later, I promise." Keanu smiled and ruffled Tommy's hair. "You take care of yourself, all right? And don't forget, I'm rooting for you." As Keanu left the room, Tommy's gaze followed him, the excitement still evident in his eyes. But when he looked down at the envelope in his hands, something shifted. For a brief moment, Tommy's smile faded and a shadow of uncertainty crossed his face. "What's wrong, sweetie?" Sarah asked gently, noticing the change. "I don't know," Tommy replied softly, his voice quieter than usual. It's just, it feels like something is wrong. Like, what if the gift isn't enough? What if nothing can fix me? Sarah's heart clenched. She had been hoping that this moment would bring Tommy the happiness he so desperately needed, but the fear and uncertainty that hung over them all was still present. In that moment, Mark stepped forward, kneeling beside Tommy's bed. "Son," he said, his voice cracking slightly, "sometimes a gift isn't about fixing things. Sometimes it's about showing you that people care, that you're not alone, and you're not alone, Tommy. You've got us and we've got you." Tommy looked up at his father, his eyes filled with questions he couldn't put into words. But what if it's not enough? The room fell into a heavy silence. Sarah held Tommy's hand tightly, willing herself to stay strong. She knew her son's questions were more than just about the gift Keanu had given him. Tommy was asking about the larger question, the question that had plagued their family for months. What if it wasn't enough to beat this disease? Just as the weight of their fears began to sink in, the phone on the nightstand rang. Mark answered, his face falling as he listened to the voice on the other end. He glanced over at Sarah, his expression hard to read. Tommy's heart skipped a beat. "Is everything okay, Dad?" Mark paused, then put the phone down. He looked at his wife, his eyes filled with a mixture of concern and something else, something Tommy couldn't quite place. "That was the doctor," Mark said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "They've just found something unexpected. We need to talk." The room went cold as the reality of the situation hit harder than ever. Despite the joy brought by Keanu's visit, the fear of the unknown loomed large. Tommy felt a knot in his stomach, and for the first time since Keanu's departure, the balloons in his hands didn't seem as bright. Something was coming. Something that would challenge everything they thought they knew about hope. The news from the doctor hit harder than anyone could have expected. The uncertainty of Tommy's situation seemed to deepen with each passing moment, and the weight of the diagnosis hung over the family like a dark cloud. But despite the grim conversation that had just taken place, Tommy remained hopeful. He didn't fully understand the implications of what the doctor had said, but he knew it wasn't good. Mark and Sarah exchanged a long, silent glance, their faces etched with concern. They had spent so many months trying to shield Tommy from the harshest realities of his illness, but now it was impossible to ignore the truth any longer. Tommy's cancer had spread, and the chances of remission were slimmer than ever. "Mom, Dad, are we going to be okay?" Tommy asked, his small voice filled with fear and confusion. His innocent eyes, once full of energy, now seemed to carry a weight far beyond his years. Sarah bent down to Tommy's level, taking his hands in hers. "Sweetheart, no matter what happens, we're always going to be okay because we have each other. We love you so much, and that love will never go away. You're not alone in this, Tommy." Mark nodded, trying to hold back his own tears. "We're going to keep fighting, buddy. We're not giving up." It was a bittersweet moment. Sarah's words were meant to comfort, but even she wasn't sure how much longer they could continue fighting. They had done everything they could to help Tommy, but sometimes life simply doesn't go the way you hope. As the days went by, the once bustling hospital room became quieter. Tommy's energy began to wane again, his body growing weaker from the intense treatments. The laughter that had filled the room after Keanu's visit seemed like a distant memory. Yet despite the growing fear and uncertainty, Sarah refused to let go of the hope that anything might change. Then a call came in the middle of the night. It was the hospital. The doctors had arranged a special procedure, something that could give Tommy a fighting chance. It was experimental, risky even, but if it worked, it could mean a miracle. They had heard of a new drug trial that had shown some success in rare cases like Tommy's. It wasn't a guarantee, but it was an option. High chance to continue the fight. At the very same moment, Keanu Reeves reached out again, offering his support. He had heard about Tommy's latest setback and insisted that he wanted to do more for him. Keanu had been keeping tabs on Tommy's progress ever since his initial visit, and he wasn't ready to give up on the young boy. "Let's try it together," Keanu had said when Sarah told him about the trial. I believe in him. I believe in you all." Keanu's words sparked a new wave of determination in Sarah and Mark. They had always tried to stay positive for Tommy, but it was moments like these, when a lifeline appeared out of nowhere, that reignited the spark of hope they thought had dimmed. Tommy, still oblivious to the details of the treatment, smiled faintly at the mention of Keanu. "He's so nice," he said softly, his eyes brightening just at the thought of the actor who had already made such a huge impact on his life. "Maybe he can help me get better." Though Tommy's words were innocent, they carried a profound sense of belief. To him, Keanu had already done more than anyone else ever had, and now with the trial treatment on the horizon and Keanu's continued support, it seemed like the impossible was becoming just a little bit more possible. Sarah and Mark made the decision to move forward with the experimental treatment. The journey ahead would be long and uncertain, but at least it was a path they could walk together. Tommy had already shown incredible strength, and now it was their turn to fight alongside him. The day Tommy was set to begin the new treatment was one of mixed emotions. While the family felt a sense of hope that they hadn't felt in months, there was also fear, a fear of the unknown. They didn't know what to expect from the treatment, and they didn't know if it would work. But for the first time in a while, they felt like they had a real chance, and that was something to hold on to. Before the treatment began, Keanu made one last surprise visit to Tommy's room. This time, he wasn't alone. He brought with him a team of doctors and specialists who had agreed to help Tommy with his treatment, further ensuring that the new drug trial would have the best possible chance of success. Tommy's eyes lit up when he saw Keanu again. "You're back," he exclaimed, his voice full of excitement. "Are you going to help me get better?" Keanu smiled, kneeling down to Tommy's level once more. "I'm going to do everything I can to help you, Tommy. You've got a lot of people rooting for you, and we're all going to be here for you every step of the way." With that, Keanu handed Tommy a special gift, a toy version of one of his favorite characters from the Matrix series, a small action figure that Tommy had admired for years. "This is for you," Keanu said, his eyes filled with sincerity. "Just remember, you're a fighter, okay?" Tommy clutched the action figure tightly, his grip firm, as if the toy represented not just a character from a movie, but a symbol of his own strength. As the doctors and nurses prepared Tommy for his treatment, the room was filled with a sense of solidarity. For the first time in months, Sarah felt a spark of hope, an undeniable belief that maybe, just maybe, Tommy's story was about to take an unexpected turn. The journey ahead would be challenging. There were still unknowns, still risks, and still moments of fear, but they were not alone. Not anymore. The days that followed Tommy's start in the new drug trial were filled with a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. Each morning, Sarah and Mark woke up with a sense of urgency, eager for any sign that the treatment was working. Every small change, every new feeling Tommy experienced, felt like it could be a clue. But as the days wore on, they saw both progress and setbacks. Tommy's energy would spike only to be followed by moments of weakness, leaving his parents both hopeful and fearful at the same time. The hospital had become their second home. The sterile smell of antiseptic and the constant hum of machines, a constant reminder of the battle they were in. But despite the uncertainty, Sarah remained steadfast. She clung to the belief that they were doing everything they could. She even found herself whispering small words of encouragement to Tommy when he would drift to sleep. "You're strong, baby. You can do this." But as much as Sarah wanted to believe it would all work out, the reality of Tommy's condition became harder to ignore. The drug trial had been a gamble, and though it had shown some early promise, the doctor's calls had started to grow more frequent and more concerning. One evening, as Sarah sat in Tommy's room, flipping through a magazine, her phone buzzed. The caller ID showed Dr. Richards, the lead oncologist overseeing Tommy's case. She answered quickly, her stomach twisting in knots. "Mrs. Williams." Dr. Richards' voice was calm, but filled with an underlying tension. "I need to speak with you about Tommy's condition." "I'm afraid we've hit a critical point." Sarah's heart raced. "What do you mean? Is it the treatment? Is it working?" There was a long pause. "The treatment has been effective to a point, but Tommy's body is still struggling. Cancer has shown some resistance, and the current treatment isn't having the results we hoped for. We need to discuss other options, including possibly a more aggressive approach. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Her mind began to race as her world seemed to tilt on its axis. Tommy had come so far. They had all fought so hard. And now, just when they thought they might be reaching a breakthrough, the doctor was telling her that things could get worse. But before she could respond, she heard a familiar voice from the door. "Mom? Dad?" Tommy's small, tired voice broke through the heavy silence. Sarah quickly wiped away the tear that had escaped down her cheek and put the phone on speaker. "Tommy, sweetie, what's wrong?" Tommy was standing at the door to his room, clutching the action figure Keanu had given him earlier. His small face was pale, but his eyes were wide with concern. "Are you crying, Mum? Why are you crying?" Tommy asked softly, his little voice holding more wisdom than anyone his age should possess. Sarah took a deep breath, forcing a smile. "I'm not crying, honey, just a little tired. Everything's okay." But Tommy wasn't convinced. His eyes searched her face for the truth, his tiny brow furrowing in a way that made Sarah's heart break. "Mom, you're scared." "Aren't you?" Tommy asked, stepping closer to her side. He held out the action figure Keanu had given him. "Look, I'm still fighting, and Keanu says I can be a fighter too." Sarah's heart ached as she gazed down at the toy in his hand. She had never realized how much this simple gesture, a toy action figure from a movie star, had meant to Tommy. It wasn't just a gift. It was a symbol of his belief in himself, of his belief that he could get better no matter what. Before she could say anything, Mark entered the room, his face a mix of exhaustion and worry. He could tell by the look on Sarah's face that the call hadn't been good news. But when he saw Tommy standing there with the action figure in his hand, something in his expression softened. "We're in this together," Mark said quietly, walking over to Tommy and kneeling beside him. "You're our little fighter, Tommy. We believe in you, and we're not going to stop believing." Tommy smiled weakly and held the toy up to his dad. "I'm not giving up, Dad. I promise." The air in the room seemed to shift. For a moment, it felt as if the three of them, Sarah, Mark, and Tommy, were not just a family dealing with a nightmare. They were a team. They were united, stronger than any obstacle life could throw their way. Just then, the phone rang again. Sarah's hand trembled as she picked it up. "Mrs. Williams," Dr. Richards' voice echoed through the speaker. "We have one more option we'd like to try. It's risky, but it could work. We want to bring you in tomorrow to discuss it in detail." Sarah felt the weight of the decision press on her chest. She glanced over at Tommy, his small hands gripping his toy action figure like it was a lifeline. "Okay, we'll be there," Sarah said, her voice steady, despite the storm of emotions inside her. She hung up the phone, then turned to her son. "We're going to do everything we can, Tommy. We're not giving up." Tommy smiled brightly, his eyes still filled with determination. "I'm ready, Mum. I'm ready to fight." And in that moment, Sarah felt something shift within her too. They might not know what tomorrow would bring, but she knew one thing for certain. They weren't alone in this fight. With the love of her family, the support of Keanu, and the strength of Tommy's spirit, there was still hope, still a chance. The full battle wasn't over. The following days were a blur of consultations, tests, and difficult decisions. The risky new treatment option was still on the table, but it was a long shot. Dr. Richards was clear about that. Still, Sarah and Mark knew they had to take every chance, no matter how slim. For Tommy, they had to keep fighting. The morning of the new treatment was filled with a mixture of anxiety and hope. Tommy, despite the exhaustion and pain that had racked his little body in recent weeks, was still holding on to that stubborn, infectious optimism. His smile, though faint, was a beacon of light for his parents. "Mom, I'm not scared," Tommy said as he sat on the edge of his hospital bed, his tiny fingers fiddling with the action figure. "I'm going to be okay. I just know it." Sarah leaned down to kiss the top of his head, tears welling in her eyes. She didn't want to admit it, but deep inside she wasn't sure how much more Tommy's little body could handle. And yet she refused to show him her fear. He needed to see hope, to see the strength that they all had to gather in the face of this relentless battle. "You are strong, sweetheart," Sarah whispered. "You've already shown us how strong you are." Mark stood by the window, staring out into the horizon as the morning sun began to rise. He wasn't a man of many words, but his mind was racing, replaying every moment of Tommy's illness. It was hard to believe that just months ago their life had been so different. Now they were here in this sterile hospital room, facing the fight of their lives, but the light of hope in Tommy's eyes made it all seem worth it. It had to be worth it. A knock at the door pulled them from their thoughts. Dr. Richards entered the room, his expression serious yet compassionate. Behind him stood a team of doctors and nurses, ready to begin the next phase of Tommy's treatment. "Mrs. Williams, Mr. Williams," Dr. Richards began, his voice measured. "Today is a critical day. I'm going to be honest with you. We don't know if this treatment will work. But we've seen signs of success in rare cases, and we have every resource we can to give Tommy the best chance." Sarah and Mark exchanged a look. It was the same look they had shared so many times before, hope mingled with fear. The fear of the unknown, the fear that they might lose Tommy. But the hope, that glimmer of possibility, was just enough to keep them going. "Let's do it," Mark said, his voice steady, though his hands trembled slightly. He walked over to Tommy's bed, kneeling beside him. "We're with you, buddy. You've got this." Tommy looked up at his dad, his small hand reaching out to grasp Mark's. "I'm ready, Dad. I'm ready to fight." And so they began. The treatment was grueling, a mixture of medications, therapies, and countless hours in the hospital. There were moments when Tommy's body didn't respond well, when he was too weak to even lift his head. Sarah and Mark stayed by his side through it all, never leaving him alone. There were days when it felt like the world was closing in on them, but they refused to give in to despair. And then, one morning, a change came. It was subtle at first, just a small shift in Tommy's energy. He ate a little more. He smiled, a little brighter. He started asking for his favorite cartoons, and for the first time in a long while he began to show signs of life beyond the hospital room. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Enough for Sarah and Mark to begin to believe that this miracle, this sliver of hope, might just be within their reach. Weeks passed. Tommy continued to make slow but steady progress, and though the journey was still far from over, there was a sense of calm that had begun to settle over the family. They had learned to take each day as it came, to savor each small victory, knowing that each one was a step closer to something greater. Then, one day, Sarah received a call that she had been waiting for with a mixture of fear and hope. Dr. Richards's voice on the other end was more upbeat than it had ever been. "Mrs. Williams," he said, "the results are in. The treatment is working. Tommy is in remission." The words didn't fully sink in at first. Sarah's hands shook as she clutched the phone, tears springing to her eyes. Tommy had made it through. He had fought through the worst, and now against all odds he was on the road to recovery. When she finally told Mark, his reaction was pure disbelief mixed with joy. He hugged her tightly, both of them overcome with emotion. Their son, Tommy, was going to be okay. That afternoon, as the family gathered in Tommy's hospital room, they were joined by someone who had been a constant source of support. Keanu Reeves, who had been following Tommy's progress every step of the way, came to visit again. This time there were no balloons or toys, no grand gestures, just a quiet, heartfelt moment between friends. Keanu sat next to Tommy's bed, his hand on the boy's shoulder, looking at him with pride. "You did it, buddy," Keanu said, his voice thick with emotion. "I knew you could." Tommy, now visibly healthier, smiled and hugged his hero. "I told you I could fight." It was a simple moment, but it was enough. The journey they had all been on, the fear, the tears, the hope, and the love had led them here, to this moment of triumph. Tommy was no longer just a sick child in a hospital bed. He was a symbol of resilience, of the power of hope, and of the incredible strength that can be found even in the darkest of times. As the family embraced, Sarah reflected on everything they had been through. She had learned that no matter how impossible things might seem, there is always a way forward, through love, through support, through hope. And even in the most desperate of situations, miracles could still happen. The journey wasn't over, but they had made it through the worst of it, and they would face whatever came next together. The journey that Tommy and his family had gone through wasn't just about overcoming illness. It was about embracing the moments that truly matter, the ones that define what it means to fight for those you love. Now, as they faced the future with a renewed sense of hope, they also realized that there was something profoundly life-changing in how they had come together, through thick and thin. But, as with all meaningful stories, the journey didn't end with Tommy's remission. It was just the beginning of a new chapter in their lives, one that was shaped by resilience, community, and most importantly, the unexpected heroes who had appeared at just the right moment. Keanu Reeves, who had once been a far-off figure for Tommy, had become a symbol of the power of kindness and the deep impact of unexpected friendships. Weeks passed, and Tommy continued to heal, becoming stronger with every passing day. The once bleak and sterile hospital room was now filled with laughter, jokes, and the bright energy of a child who had fought through the unimaginable. Keanu, ever humble, continued to keep in touch, checking in on Tommy's progress from time to time. It wasn't just about a celebrity doing a good deed. It was about a person showing true humanity, using their influence and platform to spread love and positivity. Keanu wasn't just the man who gave Tommy an action figure. He was someone who had shared in their journey and believed in their son's strength, just like they did. Sometimes the hardest battles are the ones we don't see coming, Keanu had said in one of their more recent conversations. But it's people like Tommy that remind us how powerful hope can be. He's a hero. That simple statement stayed with Sarah and Mark as they watched their son laugh and play with his action figures. The words, though simple, resonated deeply. Tommy was their hero. In his courage, they had found their own strength. And they knew that no matter what life threw at them next, they would face it with the same determination, love, and hope that had carried them through the darkest days. As they walked out of the hospital together on a sunny afternoon, Tommy running ahead, his energy coming back to him more with each step, Sarah took a deep breath and looked up at the sky. For the first time in a long while, it felt like everything was going to be okay. "You know," she said, turning to Mark, "I've been thinking. We've been through so much and somehow we made it. I don't know how, but I know that love and hope brought us here." Mark nodded, his arm around her shoulders. "And there are more good days ahead. We'll never forget the people who were there for us along the way." They both turned to look at Tommy, who was giggling and looking back at them over his shoulder. It was a sight that filled their hearts with more joy than words could express. As they continued their walk, they knew that they would never forget the incredible journey they had been on. But they also knew that their story, Tommy's story, wasn't just about overcoming the odds. It was about finding the strength to keep going, no matter how hard the road gets. Now they would carry that lesson with them forever. The lesson that, no matter how hard life can be, it's always worth fighting for. And sometimes miracles happen when you least expect them. So what would you do if you were in Tommy's shoes? Would you give up, or would you keep fighting? Think about the moments in your own life when you faced hardship and how love and hope kept you going. Share your thoughts with us in the comments below, and don't forget to hit subscribe to join us on more heartwarming journeys like this one. And hey, if you've learned something valuable from Tommy's story today, feel free to share it with someone who could use a little hope today. We all have our battles, but together we can find strength in the most unexpected places. Thank you for following Tommy's journey. This is where his story begins a new chapter, one full of hope, love, and the future that awaits him. And no matter what, it will always be a reminder of the strength we all have inside, ready to rise up when it's needed most.